So today I want to talk about three important security concepts: authentication, authorization, and encryption. Authentication is the process used to verify someone or something is who they say they are. So authentication is used by servers to verify to a user that the site is actually who you think it is. Authentication is used by users to explain to the server, I am this person. So that the server knows who is accessing their site. Usually authentication on a server in a web application involves a username and password combination. So for example, if you had a simple form where a user entered a username and password in a login form, the site would then use that username and password in a query, and you'd run the query and you'd select from your user table any records that matched both the username and the password. So select star from users, where username equals uname, password equals pass. If that returns any results, then the person is authenticated and they know who that person is. That is known as essentially a single factor authentication. Some more complex authentications is like a multi-factor authentication, where you have to enter two pieces of data or use two different mechanisms to authenticate yourself. So you might log in with a username and password, and then the system might send you a text message with a special security code, which you then use enter back into the system to authenticate yourself. This is frequently used when you're setting up accounts. It's also used in sites like banks to make sure that the person that's accessing the system is allowed to access this important data. The second concept is authorization. Authorization is a process by which we test to see if you are actually authorized to see the certain data on a system. So frequently different users on a system are authorized to see different types of data. So an administrator can see more data and do more things within a system than a regular user. And some users, people are not authorized to see anything. On most websites, there is really everybody's authorized to see everything unless you log in, and if you log in, then that will tell the system what you're authorized to see. It is possible to use PHP to do some basic HTTP authentication on any of the pages that require authorization to be viewed. So you use essentially two PHP header functions to tell the browser that authentication is required, and it will pop up an authentication required dialog box and allow people to enter their username and password, and this will set the PHP auth user parameter, then the PHP auth password parameter, as well as the PHP authorization authentication type variables, so that will persist throughout the user's session, so that you can reuse them on any page that requires authorization to be viewed. So the way you do this in PHP is you check to see whether the PHP auth user variable is set, and if it's not, then you're going to send the header authentication type basic realm, my realm. It's the realm that that's the authentication realm for the user. And then you're going to send the unauthorized header saying that the person is currently unauthorized to view the page. So the echo statement will send whatever text that the user will see if they don't enter a correct username and password. So usually it's like, you are not authorized to view this page. It could be a whole error page, and then you exit and don't allow people to see the remainder of the page. The final concept in security I want to talk about is encryption. And encryption is really the process of transforming data into a form that's unreadable to most normal people. So anybody that doesn't have the decryption or a key. So for example, SSH, or the secure shell and secure socket layer, are protocols used to encrypt data that's being transmitted between the server and a user. You can also encrypt data when you store it into your database. So when you're using PHP, you can use MD5, which is an encryption algorithm that will encrypt data. MD5 has been found not to be very secure if you use it all by itself to encrypt a password. For example, if a user uses a common password like password, somebody could easily guess that password because MD5 will always encrypt the text password in exactly the same way. So what they recommend you do is you actually use something called a salt, which is just a random number, and you add that to your password when you're encrypting it. So for example, this PHP program will connect to a database, will generate a salt, will encrypt the password, and store this encrypted password. And the way the function works is when somebody's creating their initial account, they give you a username and password. At that time, you create this random salt. This is just a random number. In this case, I'm creating a 12-digit salt. I've put the number 12 here to create this 12-digit salt, and I just return the salt to my insert user code. And when I'm inserting the user into the database the very first time, I pass the code. I insert the username, the password, which is just the password plus this salt value added together, and I encrypt both of those pieces together. I also store this salt in the database. So then when I'm going and I'm trying to validate the user, when they log in the next time, again, they log in with their username and their password. And the first thing I do is I go into the database and I find out what salt was used to encrypt their password. So I get that and I store it in a variable. And then I go and I run the select query that I showed you before, which is you're just selecting star from users, and I match the username. And when I match the password, again, I re-encrypt the password. So I pass the password and the salt to the database, encrypted using the same algorithm. If the encrypted password that I pass in the select query matches the encrypted password that I created when I did the insert, then I will have authenticated the user, and they will know they have access to the system. Authentication, encryption, and authorization are used in a wide variety of computer systems. Encryption is used whenever anybody passes data to the server, wants to do a credit card transaction. It also should be used anytime you store sensitive data like a password or a credit card number. Authentication is used whenever you want to know who's visiting your site. And then authorization is used to determine what material that user that you've authenticated has permission to see. So authentication and authorization are often used together. So if you're, for example, if a student is logging into a server at a university, you authenticate that the student is actually a student and allowed to log in, and then you authorize what data they're allowed to see. So a student should only be allowed to see their data. They should not be allowed to see the data for other students.